First, some statistics. Currently, about 15,000 fourth-generation fighters have been built around the world, and this is the basis of the Air Force fleet of almost all countries in the world, and for many years to come. For a variety of reasons, fifth-generation fighters are not yet rapidly replacing them, but someday this will happen one way or another. For example, the Norwegian Air Force has already completely switched to them. Their fighter fleet consists of only F-35s, and everything is heading towards the fact that this particular aircraft will become the most widespread representative of the fifth generation of fighters in the whole world. It was exactly the same as what happened with his predecessor. After all, every third or fourth generation fighter built is the famous F-16. It appeared in the already distant 1970s of the last century. It was created by General Dynamics, and it is noteworthy that the production of this aircraft is still ongoing. It is handled by Lockheed Martin Corporation, but of course not at all on the same scale as before. Deliveries to the main customer, the U.S. Air Force, were completed in March 2005. Over the course of a quarter of a century, they received more than 2,200 F-16s. All other customers for the entire time, about the same. No other fourth-generation fighter even comes close to these numbers. What is the reason for such popularity? Yes, in the aggregate of several key factors, including the circumstances of its appearance, flight performance, and combat capabilities, as well as the notorious economic aspects. You can't go anywhere without them. Maintaining a fighter fleet is very expensive. For all its advantages, the F-16, like any other combat vehicle, has a certain set of disadvantages. And it was not for nothing that its chief designer once said that he would have designed this aircraft differently when he learned in what main role the Air Force planned to use it. But when he finally redesigned it for new tasks, it suddenly turned out that no one was interested in the new, deeply modernized modification at all. Everyone was happy with the original F-16, with all its pros and cons. 25 customer countries and more than 4,600 aircraft built are clear proof of this. We talk about the history of its appearance, design features, and something about the combat use of the F-16 on the Avios Motor channel. To understand the reasons for the popularity of the F-16, you need to dig deep into history. Let's fast forward to 1974, in which the U.S. Air Force conducted a very important experimental program. It was called Lightweight Fighter. The American military wanted to find out what promising light fighters, built taking into account the latest advances in aerodynamics and engine building, would be capable of. And all this was to be demonstrated in practice by experimental aircraft designated YF-16 and YF-17. According to the plans of the Air Force leadership, at least officially stated, this project pursued only research purposes, and what would happen after the completion of the flight program was not announced in advance. However, the results of the lightweight fighter program were largely unexpected and truly fateful, and not only for the Air Force, but also for the U.S. Navy. As a result of this project, the two most popular American fighters of the fourth generation appeared. So what exactly did they want to find out with the help of experimental machines, and how did events develop? It all started with the fact that officers and analysts appeared in the ranks of the Air Force who did not agree with the plans for the future of their department. In the late 1960s, they became known as the Fighter Mafia. According to their ideas, the bet on the promising F-15 heavy fighter was wrong. They reached this conclusion based on their experience in air combat during the Vietnam War. She was just in the midst of it. The U.S. military began using the latest F-4 Phantom II fighter interceptor there for the first time. Among its advantages were high acceleration and speed characteristics, a sophisticated onboard radar, as well as powerful missile weapons. But as soon as the F-4 met the MiG-21 in the Vietnamese sky, quite serious problems immediately began. Having an advantage in maneuverability, light Soviet fighters often outmaneuvered American aircraft in close combat. And the first modifications to the Phantom didn't even have a built-in cannon. That's how great the hope was for air-to-air missiles. The fighter mafia team believed that the Air Force was again making a big mistake by favoring the F-15 program. This newest heavy fighter was superior to the F-4 in every way, but the concept of air combat using radar-guided missiles was still the main one. And this despite the fact that according to statistics from that time, only 1 out of 10 such missiles fired reached the target. Instead of a heavy and expensive fighter, the fighter mafia proposed building a light weighing about 8 tons and very maneuverable fighter specifically for close air combat. Its arsenal consists only of a built-in rapid-fire cannon and several short-range heat-seeking missiles. Radar-guided missiles were abandoned due to their low effectiveness. In addition, the absence of an onboard radar reduced the weight and cost of the aircraft. The maneuverability of the promising fighter was placed at the forefront. In terms of turning speeds, acceleration characteristics, and flight range, it was supposed to surpass all existing aircraft of a similar class. At the same time, achieving record maximum speeds was not required. The goal was to ensure good aerodynamic quality at medium, high, subsonic, and low supersonic speeds, precisely in the range where absolutely all close air battles took place. The main problem with the so-called Mafia fighter was that the leadership of the Pentagon and the Air Force was completely focused on the F-15 project, and there was practically no chance of another program to create an air superiority fighter. However, growing problems with significant budget overruns on the development of the F-15 still gave fighter mafia activists a chance, which they took full advantage of. In early 1971, the lightweight fighter program officially began. A special committee, which included some members of the fighter mafia, formulated a set of requirements for a light fighter and sent them to leading companies in the industry. 5 large aircraft manufacturing companies immediately responded to this request. But according to the terms of the program, only 2 participants were supposed to enter the flight testing stage, and therefore 3 competitors had to be eliminated. As a result, aircraft projects from Boeing, LTV, and Lockheed were left behind. In April 1972, the Air Force announced the start of preparations for a large flight program in which Northrop and General Dynamics aircraft would take part. To create 2 experimental prototypes, both finalists received $40 million, a very substantial amount at that time, but the time allotted for their construction was quite short. It only took 1.5 to 2 years. Many observers were very surprised by the choice of official designations. The General Dynamics aircraft were named YF-16, and the Northrop aircraft were named YF-17. The fact is that the prefix Y indicates that this aircraft could be a prototype of a production model, what the LWF program did not officially provide for. The main purpose was to demonstrate and test new technologies, and there was no talk of creating combat vehicles based on these prototypes. The designation of experimental vehicles usually begins with the letter X, but as the subsequent course of events showed, the use of the combination YF was not at all in vain or accidental. 809 flight tests under the LWF program were scheduled for 1974. General Dynamics built its planes faster than its competitors and took off first. True, already at the very beginning of the test program, a curious incident occurred that could lead to very sad consequences. On January 20th, test pilot Phil Oestreicher conducted high-speed runs on the first YF-16 prototype. At a speed of about 240 kilometers per hour, he slightly raised the front landing gear, and roll vibrations immediately appeared. The plane touched the runway with its wingtip and horizontal horizontal stabilizer and gradually began to move to the left. To save the prototype, Stryker increased the engine speed and lifted the car into the sky. About 6 minutes later, he landed safely on the same runway. By his actions, the pilot saved not only the plane but quite possibly the entire General Dynamics project. The official first flight took place as planned 2 weeks later, on February 2, 1974. According to the chief designer of the YF-16, Harry Hilliker, his team of engineers sought to build the most compact and light fighter possible. They sought the perfect balance between weight, drag, and fuel capacity to achieve outstanding maneuverability and good range. A key point in the development of the YF-16 and the fate of the entire program as a whole was the choice of the composition of the power plant. The aircraft was powered by one F-100 bypass turbojet engine manufactured by Pratt & Whitney. This was a ready-made, tested engine that was installed on the F-15 heavy fighter in the amount of 2. Knowing well its maximum thrust, overall dimensions, weight, and specific fuel consumption, Hilliker's team literally built the YF-16 around the F-100. Their plane turned out to be relatively small and very light. Its length was about 15 meters, and its wingspan was 10 meters. The weight of the empty prototype, according to various sources, was around 6.5 to 7 tons, and the maximum fuel reserve in the internal tanks is about 3,000 kilograms. Considering that the maximum afterburning thrust of the engine was 11 tons, the thrust-to-weight ratio of the aircraft turned out to be incredibly high. Already on takeoff, even with full fuel, it exceeded 1, and when approaching the air combat zone, it approached the value of 1.4. This ensured outstanding acceleration characteristics literally throughout the entire speed range and a climb rate of more than 300 meters per second. For previous generations of fighters, the numbers are simply unimaginable. In addition, the high thrust-to-weight ratio directly affected the maneuverability of the aircraft. A team of engineers led by Hilliker paid special attention to them. To achieve the least aerodynamic drag, they minimized the internal volumes of the airframe and installed a fly-by-wire control system for the control surfaces. It allowed not only to save on the weight of the aircraft, but also to make it statically unstable in the longitudinal channel, i.e. by pitch. This led to an increase in flight range due to reduced balancing losses, as well as the ability to quickly reach high angles of attack. And in order to make it possible to fly controllably at such angles, the wing received extended pointed bulges. As the angle of attack increases, they induce powerful vortices that pass over the wing consoles and the upper part of the fuselage and form large areas of low pressure there. In this way, the lifting force increases significantly and the moment of flow separation from the wing is delayed. Of course, in such modes, resistance grows like an avalanche, but the same thrust-to-weight ratio of more than 1 does not allow the speed to be lost literally in a matter of seconds. And in order to maintain good stability and controllability at high angles of attack, automatic slats were placed along the entire leading edge of the wing. To ensure stable engine operation during active maneuvering, a ventral air intake was installed. It had a simple design without internal moving elements. Adjusting the geometry of the air intake was simply not required, since the maximum speed of the aircraft was limited to Mach 2, which however was also excessive. Its air channel was curved upward in such a way that the compartments for the nose and main landing gear were located immediately behind the inlet section. The aircraft's designers were particularly successful with the cockpit. The huge convex canopy made of polycarbonate, coupled with the high seating position, provided a simply magnificent view of the airspace. And the back of the ejection seat was located at an angle of 30 degrees. This made it easier to endure heavy overloads. To improve cabin ergonomics, prototypes, a side control stick was installed on the YF-16. Let's not forget about the second participant in the program. The YF-17 prototype was slightly larger and heavier than its competitor. Its length without the air pressure receiver rod was almost 16 meters, and its wingspan was 10.7 meters. According to some sources, the weight of the empty plane was in the region of 8 to 8.5 tons. Compared to its counterpart, the Northrop aircraft had two significant differences. The first is the power plant. It consisted of two experimental YJ-101 turbojet engines manufactured by General Electric. In afterburner mode, their total thrust was more than 13.5 tons. And of course, even with a full supply of fuel, which is about 3,500 kilograms, at any given time the aircraft's thrust-to-weight ratio was above 1. The second difference is the aerodynamic layout. The YF-17 was equipped with a high-mounted wing with bulges and a two-fin tail unit. This configuration made it possible to fly controlled LY at angles of attack at which all other modern combat aircraft simply went into a tailspin. This ability is needed in order to quickly turn your nose to the enemy during an air battle and open fire from a cannon, or to lock on a target with a missile homing head. And two fins with a slight camber outward help to get off high angles of attack when horizontal stabilizers are no longer effective. The LWF program assumed a single test weapon configuration. Each aircraft was to have a built-in 20mm cannon and two AIM-9 heat-seeking missiles. Both participants placed the missiles on the wingtips, but chose a different location for the cannon. The designers of the YF-16 installed it on the left side, at the place where the wing and fuselage smoothly meet, and their colleagues from Northrop placed a cannon in the bow in front of the cockpit. Flight testing under the LWF program ended at the end of 1974. And it is noteworthy that the two competitors never met in simulated dogfights. This wasn't even in the plans, and the results of joint maneuvers with fighters of previous generations turned out to be very predictable. Experimental prototypes completely dominated in close combat. However, for both participants, this was all secondary. The fact is that the LWF program has undergone dramatic changes over the course of the year. General Dynamics and Northrop went from mere competitors to true competitors, with winner taking all. In late spring, before the YF-17's first flight had even taken place, the program changed its name to Air Combat Fighter. Thus, the Air Force indicated a change in the vector of its movement. Based on one of the prototypes, it was now planned to build a multi-role fighter bomber. With this action, they resolved several issues at once. First, lobbyists for the F-15 program no longer perceived the project as a direct competitor and stopped exerting negative pressure. Second, Air Force leadership has been planning for some time to create a light strike fighter to replace aging aircraft. And thirdly, tempting export prospects have appeared. At the beginning of 1974, 4 European countries, Belgium, Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark, formed a working group that began searching for a replacement for the F-104 Starfighter. The Europeans have expressed their readiness to purchase a large batch of new American multi-role aircraft created on the basis of prototypes of the LWF program. But first, they wanted to know whether the U.S. Air Force was going to take them into service, and only then make a final decision. Already at the beginning of autumn, it became known that they would purchase at least 650 light fighters and then could increase their number to 1,500 or more. Buyers from Europe had to wait for the results of the competition. On January 13, 1975, a press conference was held at which Secretary of the Air Force John McLucas announced the winner. A promising multi-role fighter-bomber will be built on the basis of the YF-16. The minister noted the good work of both participants and made some arguments in favor of General Dynamics. Their aircraft had an advantage in a number of maneuvering qualities, especially in terms of turning speeds, available overloads, and acceleration characteristics. The comfortable cockpit of the pilot was also noted, which was provided with good all-round visibility and better tolerance of high overloads. The minister did not mention the power plant factor, but without any doubt it was one of the determining factors. Sharing an engine with the F-15 fighter was beneficial to both projects. Due to more massive purchases, its cost could be significantly reduced. And if critical problems are discovered, they will be corrected faster. It is noteworthy that both of these options worked almost immediately. As for the YF-17 aircraft, failure in the competition opened up a completely different path for it. On its basis, the McDonnell Douglas F-A-18 carrier-based fighter was built. The good takeoff and landing characteristics of the Northrop prototype came in handy here. The key to the future popularity of the F-16 was a combination of several factors, and winning the air combat fighter competition was just the starting point. In a simplified form, the formula for success can be presented as follows. This is a successful basic aircraft plus the cost of its purchase and maintenance multiplied by a large modernization program. Let's decipher each component separately. The basic pre-production F-16A first took off in December 1976, and full-fledged large-scale production began a year later. Such a fast start was due to the fact that the single-seat F-16A inherited the YF-16 airframe design almost unchanged. No fundamental changes were required, but the length of the aircraft still had to be increased slightly. The nose section added 41 centimeters to accommodate the APG-66 radar, and the central part was stretched by 25 centimeters to increase the volume of internal fuel tanks. The area of the wing, vertical stabilizer, and ventral ridges has also increased quite a bit, which, along with the addition of onboard avionics, increased the weight of the empty F-16A to just over 8 tons. The number of hardpoints also increased. There were 9 of them at once. They could accommodate ammunition and fuel tanks with a total weight of up to 4.5 tons. The design of the aircraft was approximately 90% made of traditional alloys of aluminum and steel, which significantly affected its cost. The result was an inexpensive and relatively easy-to-maintain lightweight multi-role fighter that attracted great interest from other countries. A group of 4 European countries kept their word and ordered a batch of 348 aircraft.